Well, Volodymyr Zelenskyy is marking Ukraine's Independence Day with a message of fierce patriotism, saying a new nation is now born out of 6 months of war with Russia.
Ми нарешті стали дійсно єдині. Нова нація, яка з'явилась на світ 24 лютого о 4 ранку. Не народилась, а відродилась. Нація, яка не плакала, не кричала, не злякалась, не втекла, не здалась.
Now, this is what it looks like in a city near the front lines of Russia's war on Ukraine. Kramatorsk is under a 2-day curfew over fears that Russian forces would target any public events to mark Ukraine's Independence Day. It's one of the places that has been hit hard by Russian bombardments, and you may remember that dozens of civilians were killed just last April when a train station packed with refugees was hit. Now, like in other cities and towns close to the fighting, a mass evacuation effort has been underway there for months. Ukrainian authorities are hoping to move as many as 220,000 people out of the Donetsk region by this fall. Senior correspondent Susan Ormiston joins us from Kyiv to lead off our coverage this morning. Good morning, Susan. As we mentioned, this is both Ukraine's Independence Day, but it's also been 6 months since the war began. How are Ukrainians marking this day?
Well, good morning, Hannah. We are in the center of Kyiv, and as you can see, there are dozens of destroyed Russian war machines, tanks, armored personnel carriers, radar systems. They have been brought here, seized, and presented here as a showcase of Ukrainian resistance. And there's a lot of curiosity about them. You can see people peering inside. Some of them are burned out and charred. They're coming down here to see what havoc and brutality Russia did in the early part of this war around Kiev, but also to marvel at the fact that Ukrainians were able to thwart Putin's plan to have an Independence Day parade, a Russian one, on this street on this day. Of course, that didn't turn out the way the Russian president wanted, and now we have this display. But in spite of warnings, repeated warnings from the Ukrainian government to Ukrainians not to mass in big celebrations today, there are lots of people here. It's as busy as we've seen it on previous days. There is no grand parade, an independence parade on this street, as is historically often here. But they are coming down here, and this morning we were out in Irpin, about 30 minutes from Kyiv. You'll remember fierce battles there, and we watched a very emotional service where they were giving out medals for those 38 soldiers who died fighting to push the Russians away from Irpin, widows with young children. I spoke to a father who described his 31-year-old son who wouldn't listen to him to stay out of the fighting, went ahead and was killed. He said he was proud, but also, of course, awfully grief-stricken that his son had died during those battles.
And Susan, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has been warning of an escalation in Russian attacks. What is happening around the country?
Well, we did hear several air raid sirens here in Kyiv, and even as we've been standing here today, people are ignoring them, as they have been. They're quite frequent, steady over the last 6 months all around the country. The government has asked them to respect them today and go to shelters, but people seemingly here in Kyiv are not. However, there has been shelling overnight in various places where the fighting is fierce still, in Kharkiv, in Dnipro, and in the south near Zaporizhia, that nuclear plant, shelling again overnight. So the fight is ongoing as Russia continues its attack. But so far, we haven't seen battles or surprise vicious attacks that President Zelenskyy had warned Ukrainians could happen as Russia wanted to destroy this Independence Day, which of course celebrates Ukraine's separation from the former Soviet Union 31 years ago.
In his address to mark this day, Zelenskyy is speaking about victory and repeating a vow that Ukraine would recapture Crimea and other territory that's now occupied by Russia. But is he convincing the world and other Ukrainians of this message?
Well, remember when this war first started, everyone was talking about peace. There were negotiations, hopefully, that would lead to some kind of ceasefire as a precursor to peace. But we heard from President Zelenskyy this morning in a pre-recorded Independence Day address, seemingly from this very street at some point, say that victory to Ukrainians now is not peace, it's victory. That means reclaiming all the territory that it used to have, including Crimea, which was annexed by Russia illegally in 2014. Here's Zelenskyy.
We're holding on for 6 months. It's difficult for us, but we clenched our fists, fighting for our fate. Every new day is a new reason not to give up, because, having gone through so much, we have no right not to reach the end. What is the end of the war for us? We used to say peace. Now we say victory.
There are no ongoing negotiations for a ceasefire at this point. There is a fight ongoing, and it seems to have stalemated somewhat with the worst fighting in the east and that southern corridor. Most Ukrainians I've spoken to are now accepting that this war will be protracted, will last much, much longer. They are confident they'll still win, but they can't say exactly how. They realize that President Putin and the Russian army is not giving up.
Okay, Susan, thank you to you and the team on the ground there. Susan Ormiston in Kyiv.